then, of course, this thing called a global pandemic came along. That put a ginormous reset in terms of your ability to sort of meet people. Everything became, digital and virtual. And that's actually when Microdose was born. And the end result was an event which ended up running for 2 days, had Rick Doblin hosting a Zoom after party, and 100 plus speakers, and I think 1,200 or so virtual attendees.
Hello and welcome to the Mindfulness Experience Podcast. I'm your host, Keith Fiveson. We are an official Wonderland Miami 2023 conference media partner. Remember to sign up with the code Mindfulness20 for a 20% discount on the standard registration fee. Today we have an exceptional guest, Mr. Richard Skaife, the co-founder and partner of the Conscious Fund. Richard will be sharing his insights and expertise in the psychedelic medicine space. With over 20 years of experience in the technology and music industry, he's also made over 20 investments in psychedelic medicine companies, with 9 of them going from seed to public after his firm's investment. He is also the chairman of Microdose and Wonderland, the largest media and events company for the psychedelic medicine sector, and an advisor to the Psychedelic Medicine Association. All right. Richard, how is it going today? What is happening?
Thank you for having me on the show, Keith.
Well, thank you so much for allowing us the opportunity to speak with you and being a partner with the Wonderland Miami conference. It's very exciting what's happening November the 9th through the 11th, and we're excited to be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so tell me, can you tell us a little bit about your work with the Conscious Fund and its mission in investing in global early stage venture psychedelic medicine companies?
Yeah, so a little bit of history. I guess we form almost part of the old guard now, and the old guard being from 2019 onwards. So there was, sort of 2016, 2017, there was a couple of companies who were looking at the space, and really, I would say disbelief that this is ever going to be achievable, that there would not be a government which would be willing to allow for psychedelics to become part of therapy. And there'd been some very valuable work done before that by organizations such as MAPS, which is a very big not-for-profit. And then in 2019, we started to look at the sector as a potential opportunity, and we started to see some interesting companies, got to know some people. Something was sort of happening, and what we kind of now know is that there was some of those very early companies were actually getting a relatively warm embrace by the regulators, and they were being given special status in terms of the legitimacy and the importance of the work that they were doing, and it's referred to as a breakthrough therapy status. It's given very occasionally by the FDA as the US regulator who approves new medicines. Right. And that we see really now was a sort of a validation and inspiration to a lot of people who'd watched on the sidelines, a lot of people who'd been working as medicinal chemists in other organizations, but had got a profound belief and understanding and experience of working with the compounds, but could never, of course, be transparent in terms of the work that they were doing. So companies then started to sort of come to the market the early part of 2020, and we invested in some of those very, very early companies.
Which companies were?
So very early on, so companies like Atai, which is one of the biggest companies in the space, Cybin.
It was a huge investment, wasn't there? Just yesterday.
Indeed, just yesterday. So a hedge fund legend who was also given a lot of money through charitable donations to psychedelic medicine research, made what we believe is the first sort of commercial investment into the sector. Pretty significant number.
So like 19 million shares or something like that?
Yeah.
The stock shot up from like up to 45 cents, right?
Yeah. So it's, it's given a real big shot in the arm to Cybin, and they've just recently acquired a very interesting company, one of the very early companies called Small Pharma. So we did Cybin, we did Atai, we did groups such as Gilgamesh, which is now one of the largest privately owned companies. And then, of course, this thing called a global pandemic came along, and that put a ginormous reset in terms of your ability to sort of meet people. Everything became, digital and virtual, and that's actually when Microdose was born, and that was really a reflection of us having a bit too much time on our hands, thinking, what can we do to kind of keep this momentum going? And we said, wouldn't it be great if we could maybe get 5 or 6 of the companies we've invested into, and maybe get 50 people coming along to hear about psychedelic medicine who've never heard about it. And the end result, about 6 weeks after we'd announced the dates, when we were all still locked down, was an event which ended up running for 2 days, had Rick Doblin hosting a Zoom after party, and 100 plus speakers, and I think 1,200 or so virtual attendees, and people who attended it making decisions in terms of what they do with their life going forward, in terms of the professional career they wanted to pursue, what sort of course of academia was going to be applicable to them, and people saying to us, well, when is the next one? So we partnered up with a group of entrepreneurs from Canada who'd worked on the show with us, and had been driving a lot of the platform behind the scenes, and Microdose became the media company that it is now. And sort of jumping years forward, as the world started to come out of lockdown, we said, wouldn't it be great if we could bring everybody together and put on a really interesting, really colorful sort of reignition of the movement, and provide a space for everybody who has yet to meet for the first time in real life to be able to do that. So what we saw at the very first Wonderland was people meeting their employees for the first time, people meeting their employers, people meeting their investors, people meeting their customers. And it really was the first time that many of them had ever had the opportunity to meet in some cases for nearly 2 years. Well, we just continued from there onwards.
This event that went on, last year I was at the Wonderland. Was that number 2 or number 3?
That was number 2, yeah.
That was number 2. And there were close to 3,000 people there. And it was just such an incredible event at the Ice Palace in Miami. And, what you're doing with the platform, the Microdose platform, is just absolutely exceptional. I've had an opportunity to write some articles there as well. And it's a really good source for insight, for legislation, for, everything from culture to politics to finance and so on. So this year, I really am excited to be a part of the 2023 conference at the Ice Palace again. So it's going to be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's been a key a kind of key theme for us. We are working in areas of science, and we are working in areas of politics and legislation and finance, but ultimately we're working with life-changing substances, and we've always wanted to create an event format which is a reflection of that. And the amount of people who've been along to Wonderland, who have maybe been working in other areas of drug discovery, other areas of life science, for most of their professional career, and this is kind of their first psychedelic conference, all come away remarking, saying, wow, Usually
Wow.
I dread going to a conference. It's time away from my family. They're not much fun, but this is, managed to sort of blend information
and culture,
and learning and culture
Yeah.
in such a sort of seamless way. And that's, I think, like a huge compliment, for us, and also the people who come, that we've managed to sort of do that.
Well, that's it's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm very excited. And we've already spoken with quite a few wonderful folks. Let me ask you: you've been involved in over 20 psychedelic medicine companies. Can you share maybe some breakthroughs or success stories from your portfolio of companies that you've worked with?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you should never have a favorite child as a venture capitalist. Got to love them all equally, so it's always a bit difficult in terms of where you want to sort of shine the light. But I think really it's that, when anybody's building a startup of any type, they're going on Mission Impossible. They are fundamentally doomed to failure. The chances of success are really remote. And when you then add, certainly for a lot of these folks who went very, very early, the investors who went very, very early, that sort of unknown set of circumstances as to whether these sort of medicines will ever be accepted, that's been, really, really encouraging, and sort of picking out, individual companies, always really challenging, because you always go into those sort of transactions with a huge amount of hope and a huge amount of belief in terms of the teams that you're going to back. And do
you have let me ask you a question. When you look at the teams that you're going to back and this trepidation, when we start talking about, trusting your gut, are there certain kind of values or certain kind of things you look at in terms of the leadership or the organization, or certain things that sort of like trigger you and say, based on, not only the logic, but the emotional, the IQ and the EQ, how you mix those together? Are there certain things that are there? And again, I interrupted you, but I'm wondering about, like, one or two examples.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's a great question and questions. So to go to the when you are looking at a company which is ultimately going to be involved in bringing out licensed pharmaceuticals, you generally want to see a large number of the team members having been on a similar journey in the past, which of course with psychedelics is quite difficult, because there isn't anybody who's yet to bring, with the exception of Johnson & Johnson and Spravato, a licensed psychedelic into the market. Right. So you're looking for people who worked in very pioneering areas of medicine. You're looking for absolute conviction, an absolute ability to not shy away from the fact that the area that they're working in could still be perceived as controversial, and not want to sort of hide from it. That's less so now. We have reached a point where there is much larger acceptance. There's incredible amounts of stuff happening, state by state in the United States, countries, changing legislation. So you like scientists who've been on that journey before. They understand the process, the requirement to go through all of those different stages. And then when you're looking at the sort of more entrepreneurial team members, you really want to get a feel that you are going to enjoy going on the journey with them.
Right, is this the person I'd like to be stuck at the airport with for 3 hours?
Absolutely. And there are companies, which we looked at and we said, the probability of success here is possibly quite high, but there's just things which came out during conversations that we can't sort of calculate as being 100% accurate. and I can't obviously name the company, but there was one where they were making statements around intellectual property that they owned.
Mm-hmm.
And then they contradicted themselves a little bit later on, because they actually said to me they were jumping on a plane to go and sign this particular IP deal. And I was thinking, well, hold on a second. You told me earlier you got all this IP.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if you? So you know, those kind of things spook you, and we ended up sort of passing on that deal because of that. And actually, it turned out to be relatively successful for a period of time. Not as successful now. Ironically, a lot of the stones that are being thrown at that particular company is around their intellectual property portfolio. So you know, and it was.
So integrity is a big is a big deal. Yeah.
And it was really difficult during that period of time, because you were not afforded you know, the ability to truly get to know someone. You know, you couldn't sort of go out and have a quick lunch. You couldn't sort of randomly pick which team member you wanted to spend some time with and just listen to their perspectives and what's it like to work there. You know, it was all very, very contrived, and it was all being done digitally. So, you know, a lot of the skills that you hone in on and that you've developed over your previous life prior to coming into this space were not necessarily ones that you are going to be able to be calling on. So it was interesting times, but I say we've you know, so far we've picked, I think, some very, very impressive companies, and they're doing some really incredible work, and you know, the ones that we sort of predicted will be you know, the clear market leaders do look like they will ultimately become the kind of clear market leaders with big areas of innovation, which is, you know, still yet to manifest. I think some of the most powerful companies in this space have yet to be conceived. Brilliant. Because they haven't made the scientific discoveries yet, because the scientists haven't probably met.
Right. And that's, I mean, you know, it's the space is really evolving so quickly. And, you know, it certainly sounds like you are on the, you know, in the precipice. You're in the swell of the evolution. And I'm wondering, you know, you talked about the breakthrough, the FDA providing breakthrough therapy status for MDMA. And I know, you know, Rick Doblin and MAPS has certainly gotten that. And there's a lot of hope and anticipation that next year there will be, since they finished with phase 3, there will be an opportunity to go ahead and roll a lot of that out. I'm wondering, from your view, standing at, you know, if you will, standing on the mountaintop, not, you know, and the mountain keeps growing, certainly, but certainly standing on the hill, standing on one of the hills that heads up to the mountaintop. Okay, we'll bring it back there, but still having a perspective and a vision in terms of what's happening in the marketplace. I'm wondering what you think the future of psychedelic medicine is, and how it's evolving and transforming mental health, addiction, and pain management. And where do you think we're going?
Yeah, I think, and this is again, a lot of what I'm saying is going to be hugely reflective of the country that you live in, and you know, the way that sort of drug policy is reformed in your country. But I've always just to sort of take the US as an example. I do believe there will be two tracks. So we will see what is happening state by state level. So we take Oregon as the melting pot of that. You will have these centers of spirituality and enlightenment and wellness who will struggle to be able to make any form of medical claims.
So that's like the RFRA, the psychedelic churches that are rising up, and the communities that are supporting them. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely, and those will be really important components. But a large amount of the population will always go and have a conversation with their physician or the associated specialists around that physician, and that's why the medicalization model is also incredibly important. And that's ultimately where somebody is going to be able to get insurance redemption through that medicalization model. So those really will be the two tracks. And as you picked up on earlier, Keith, the federalization of psychedelics, we anticipate with MDMA will be the early part of next year. And, it's still going to go quite slow. I think there'll be far more patient demand than there is access available. MAPS have a significant task ahead of them in terms of ensuring that they can train a legion, I won't say an army, a legion of therapists, and that those therapists have places which are fit for purpose for them to work from and to treat and care their patients. So that really is the sort of the medicalization strand, and then there's many different names for the other strand, the decriminalization, the local legislation, but that strand will exist. And I think America is quite uniquely afforded those rights, and I spend a lot of my time talking with American counterparts, and I have to remind them that the rest of the world doesn't follow those models. So they are very lucky in that respect, that those models will get to live side by side. We of course have seen access now being made available in Australia to psilocybin and MDMA. Again, the barrier to entry is still quite high. Europe, I think we'll start to see a small number of countries allowing for natural psychedelics to be available.
Like plant medicine, meaning?
Plant medicine, and the reason being is
envisions.
that anything that's synthetic falls to the central regulator, and the central regulator has already got clinical trials running through the competent local regulators who are part of that central regulator. So they don't tend to ever sort of get involved with allowing for a synthetic compound to go through at a local level. At a local level in Europe, I mean a country level. But it's gone much faster than I think any of us really anticipated. A lot of the things that we were predicting as 5-year, 10-year, ginormous leaps forward are things which have actually already occurred. And that was stuff we were talking about in 2020. So I think when sometimes you get a little bit disillusioned, and certainly as the world has had quite a lot of, sort of macroeconomic impacts, and that certainly has a significant toll on biotech and life sciences in terms of the availability of capital. You do have to sort of stand back and reflect and say, well, my goodness me, actually, in 3 and a bit years since we sort of started to look at this as a category rather than just an underground sort of community, we've gone quite some way.
And it's really quite unbelievable, especially when you had mentioned Australia, and I had the opportunity to speak with Ben Sessa, who's just leading a team there to go ahead and train MAPS trained therapists to go ahead and be psychedelic assisted trained therapist. I went through the IPI MAPS program myself as a psychedelic assisted therapy provider, and I'm just floored by seeing how the evolution and how things are changing. And you also mentioned Oregon, given their recent regulatory approvals, and the growing interest in psychedelic medicine. I'm wondering, how do you see the investment landscape changing in the space? Is it, because I also see the rise of psychedelic churches. I think there are more RFRA, 508c1As than ever before. We see so many people trying to get into the landscape, but obviously until we get federal regulatory approvals, there are certain things that we're going to have to, put on the gas and put on the brake for.
So I think, Oregon has got some restrictions in place to stop that, and I think it's probably a good thing as well, to stop it becoming heavily capitalized in terms of ownership structure rules. So it really is trying to put a sort of community first approach to entrepreneurship, and that's a good thing for those sort of modalities of access. And when you look, at the world that I live in terms of venture capital, we're always going to tend to sort of graduate more towards life science type models, federally approved, longer term, higher risk in some regards. That's the world that we tend to live in. But I've certainly noticed that there's a lot of people who've had their interest piqued in terms of getting involved in the psychedelic medicine movement in different areas than we've typically invested into. So, we're seeing people building out interesting nutraceutical products, Amanita muscaria, people putting money into, psychedelic therapy centers as business opportunities, real estate investors looking at the real estate structures which need to be provided to clinic operators. Quite a broad mix of opportunities are being invested into, and that's a good thing.
Right. And I met with someone over at the Denver Psychedelic Science 2023 conference that was a real estate developer that really developed these turnkey spas that were, around the country, around the world, to go ahead and really use those spas as wellness centers for using medicine in a psychedelic assisted way to go ahead and then using the therapies that came out of that, not only psychedelic assisted therapy, but meditation, yoga, spa treatments, the whole 9 yards. So, it's very, very interesting as to where this could go.
That sounds like our friends at Healing Commercial Real Estate, which we're investors of.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll have to go back into my Rolodex, but I'll have to go back into my phone and do a search. Yeah, and I think it's a wonderful concept. I think there are a lot of people, though, while we start talking about it's not a panacea for everyone, there are some misconceptions, some challenges, some things that are there certainly not only in terms of the investment area, but how it differs from traditional healthcare investments. And I'm wondering if you can talk to some of those challenges and some of the misconceptions that people might have.
Yes, and it is quite different. And I think when I try and draw an analogy of a sort of a licensed therapeutic, which is far more effective in the hands of a skilled provider, I fall to something like maybe a Botox. If Botox is in the wrong hands, it can be very forgiving.
We've seen some of those disasters.
Absolutely, and if it's in the right hands, then depending on your perception,
you don't notice.
You don't notice. So, and that is certainly one of the sort of the challenges of bringing these therapeutics to market, and the companies have really had to step up and do things that you would never see in a conventional life cycle, a life science company. So they're having to build out training programs for their physicians. So, Cybin have got a program at the moment. MAPS, been on itself, have their program, and that's pretty unique. And I guess we've grown up with it in this this space. But when you go and talk to somebody from innovation pharma or big pharma, this is really novel to them. They've never sort of come into this before, and these big organizations kind of like everything to be relatively similar and quite repeatable. But we have seen very recently, I wouldn't necessarily say they were true big pharma, but a very large pharmaceutical company acquire a psychedelic company, and that I think is a very strong signal as to
what company, what big pharma company did that. I'm wondering.
So the company that made the acquisition was Otsuka, the Japanese, and they've been investing actually into the space for quite some time. And it was not a ginormous acquisition in terms of, it wouldn't make the front pages of the Wall Street Journal because of the size of the number, but it may make it because of the actual category. But it's positive, and everybody has different views on the role that conventional pharmaceutical companies will play, and whether it's a good thing that they get involved in this sector, or whether it's a bad thing they get in this sector.
Right.
And you could have a 15-hour debate.
Well, certainly from an hour.
Just on that.
Well, that continues to be like a common theme among many people, thinking, in terms of biotech, big pharma, little pharma, psychedelic startups, that, at the end of the day, the play is that a big pharma company will come in and buy them. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, listen, you're looking at north of $1 billion. If you follow the most conventional mechanisms to get a therapeutic all the way to market access. That is a lot of money that a company has got to raise, or has to be acquired earlier on in their journey, or has to do some form of sort of licensing deal. Getting a therapeutic into the market is extremely expensive. So that there is a role that the incumbents will need to play, or very deep-pocketed private equity, venture capital, biotech firms are going to have to play, because let's say you manage to find mechanisms which cut the cost of the drug trial down. Well, somebody's still got to find 500, 600 million.
Wow. So I want to get into your music industry background and your technology background, but I want to ask you, before we kind of segue towards that a little bit more, as an entrepreneur, whether or not you'd have any advice for, founders in the psychedelic medicine industry, that are looking to go ahead and position their companies and looking to go ahead and, bring them to market, and, given your expertise.
One of the things that we noticed very early on, when this sort of sector started to evolve, was the amount of people who were there for a quick buck. And these companies were ill-conceived, badly put together, and were clearly designed to quickly taken into public markets, and for some unsuspecting investor to be
pump and dump
with a load. Yeah, and so please don't be one of those people. That space does not exist anymore. Thank goodness that opportunity is well and truly over. You have to come, being prepared for this to be the next 5, 7, 10 plus years of your life. That's what you're going to do. And I always point out, we appeared as a fund at a very opportunistic moment, and life is always about finding opportunities and arriving at the right moment. So we got our timing really, really well. But as I always pointed out to somebody, we can never be tourists. We have to be there for the duration of our fund, which will be up to 10 years. So, we're not afforded the opportunity of just sort of coming in and trying it and seeing if we like it. We've got to be there for the long term. We focus exclusively on investing into psychedelic medicine and everything which sits around it. So for us, that can be artificial intelligence, machine learning, patient data systems, media companies, nutraceuticals. But ultimately, you're going to be going on a long journey. And as the market conditions currently are, it's not going to be the easiest business to raise money for. So, you've really got to come with a long-term view and real sort of grit and resolve in terms of getting it done, because the days easy money are over, and unfortunately, too many companies which were not going to add a whole lot of value did manage to raise money, and unfortunately people lost money on those companies.
Right. So having integrity is really important in any business, but I think even more so in this industry, because it really is all about the container, right? Creating a safe container for the community and for the individuals so that they can feel like the organization and the company is there for you, for the highs and the lows, and certainly that you understand who they are and you're involved with them.
And to go back almost 10 questions.
One
of the things you asked me was, when you're talking to entrepreneurs, it's not a prerequisite before you raise money that you need to have had a meaningful psychedelic experience, but it really helps. And I do know people in this space who have not had any form of psychedelic experience, but they are incredibly committed to it because they've actually looked at it at a neurological level, and they get passion from the data and the machine readouts that they've seen, rather than having had the experience themselves. And I think that's equally as very valid. What, of course, we used to see very, very early on was people saying things, it's great, it's the next cannabis, it's the I was like, and that's just not really, really helpful.
And especially if you're talking about cannabis, because I've talked to so many people who really believe in cannabis, but they believe that the horse has gotten out of the gate without the saddle. And, the problem is that it's very hard to ride when you start taking a look at what's happened with cannabis in a recreational market, where really there are so many medicinal benefits and so many medicinal qualities to it.
Absolutely.
So I want to get, I want to get into the music, Richard. I want to start talking about your music background, your technology background, and really understand a little bit about that, but also how that's influenced your approach to investing and, leading into psychedelic medicine and the industry.
Absolutely. Well, beside of me, I did spend a bit of time working with some very well-known rock artists and some sort of pop superstars.
And can you drop some names, please?
Metallica was one of them.
All right.
I am an electronic music fan, so I wasn't working with my idols, but I was very lucky to actually work with
Metallica, my grandson's favorite.
I'm in a great band, nonetheless. Very privileged to have spent time working with them. But my passion was electronic music, and I was very fortunate to go on a career journey with a lady who became the world's #1 female DJ, a lady called Lisa Lashes, and we still keep in regular contact. Her passion now is sound therapy and sound healing, and this is a woman who, at the height of her career, used to be wearing leather and PVC, huge amounts of makeup, looking incredibly fearsome, and playing music which was never less than about 155 BPM to clubbers at 4 o'clock in the morning. So she's mellowed somewhat. Still keeping contact, but had a whole lot of fun. We were doing clubs in Ibiza, touring all over the world, and I was responsible for bringing a lot of big electronic music concepts to life, which was now coming up to 23 years ago, and really fascinating that some of those concepts are still alive today and are actually selling more tickets than when we used to put them on. Probably the same amount of tickets, they just sell them quicker. So some 20 plus years later. So I was involved in 2 musical genres in the electronic space, or subgenres. One which is called hard house, which is having a bit of a resurgence, and there are DJs now who are younger than the actual sounds that they are playing, because a lot of these sounds were from the sort of 98, 99, 2000, and they're in their early 20s. So some of these records were made before they were actually born. And one of the things I actually saw with what people do in nightclubs, I always have to be very careful with this, what people do in nightclubs. So the UK had a reputation for football hooliganism. And for anybody who's not familiar with the concept of football hooliganism, it was white gang culture. And these were groups of pretty much exclusively guys who would go to fight each other over nothing more than the football club they supported, and the violence. Whilst there were no firearms involved, there was lots of bottles and knives and metal bars, and there was thousands of people who would invade cities.
Lots of alcohol, I'm sure.
Lots of alcohol.
Not much cannabis or psychedelics.
No, this is the interesting thing with psychedelics. So at about the same time that football hooliganism was reaching its crescendo, and the government was issuing all sorts of new laws and directions to the police and increased prison sentences, football hooliganism went on a massive decline. And that was the rise of the acid house movement in the UK. So all of a sudden you had these guys who swapped from alcohol to acid house, and they wanted to leave their past behind them. And generally what was also associated with football hooliganism was racism and homophobia. And these people started to experience clubs where there was, gay people in there, black people in there. They started to have gay friends and black friends, and they would go to parties and they'd feel these real connections. And there's lots of really great videos on YouTube interviewing people who were the head of the football firm, i.e. the leader of the gang, and they said, "What made you stop?" And they said, "Acid house." And quite often they were working as the security at these parties. And somebody would say to them, "Have you tried this?" And they would try it, and it fundamentally changed the way that they looked at the world, and they became much nicer people. So that was one really sort of powerful example of where psychedelics changed the behavior of a large section of society for good. And then the other really interesting one that I saw, so Northern Ireland was very much known for its troubles, and we did a show over there, and at the start of the night, one half of the room, and it was a mixed show, and that was really unusual because generally Catholics and Protestants didn't mix. So one half of the room was green and the other half of the room was orange, and there was an invisible wall down the middle. No violence, but the crowd were not mixing. And about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, everything was going well, and the crowd started to come together. And they started to become common friends. And I think, again, there was a lot of that, that mixing of society, which started to change very, very deep-seated dislike and hatred of each other, because of these people actually having really positive, impactful experiences in altered states. And if you look at some of the work that's being done by people like Max, using ayahuasca and MDMA as part of conflict resolution, you can understand, where that comes from. So I think, from my own sort of experience, music and music culture and everything that ran through it had a tremendous impact on the way that society actually went about its day-to-day business. So yes, I did that for many years. It was a whole lot of fun. And very recently, I've sort of stepped back into a little bit of the music world, and we've launched our own record label at Microdose, Microdose Music, producing what we call functional music. So music which has got a set and a purpose, and that is ultimately to be using this music in a psychedelic medicine ceremony setting, but you can also use it for breath work and for deep thinking. So it's nice to sort of, nice to have it as a little sort of hobby. And most of the people who are involved in that meeting, not all of them, have generally kind of come through the faster paced sort of club environment, and they've slowed things down themselves.
I spoke with Paul Nolan last year, and
he's our label director.
Yeah, he is. He is just such a. He's a genius, and we just had this wonderful conversation from a musicologist viewpoint and a musical therapy viewpoint, and really getting into the sensory aspects of it and the energetics of it. And I think it's just wonderful. It's just great.
No,
great
I mean,
stuff.
and the album that Paul has produced, and Paul has had a lifetime career of being the man behind the magic curtain for some of the biggest names in dance music. Has never really gone to have the limelight. But his album Dissolve, which is on Apple Music and Spotify at the moment, so you can stream it, is a really powerful and very, very emotional musical score.
Yeah, powerful stuff. And he was DJing or doing some of the DJing last year at the Wonderland conference. I assume he'll be there this year.
Absolutely, we couldn't keep him away.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to linking up with him again. Let me ask you, just as we close down, given the time, can you share any exciting projects or developments on which the Consciousness Fund or Microdose is working on? Anything that we can look forward to? Maybe an inside scoop here?
Well, I think I've just ruined the big reveal of Microdose music.
Oh, it's great. There was an announcement.
That was going to be my
I saw the
point
announcement. I mean, I'm looking forward to that for sure. But,
I mean, things have settled now. We're into a groove. We're seeing different types of companies coming forward, some, a little bit more focus on how they can make money a little bit earlier on in their journey. We're always evolving things with Microdose, from the music and the training and the conferences. We've got some interesting stuff coming out, probably towards the tail end of this year, beginning of next year, around the commerce side of the Microdose brand. But yeah, watch this space. And Microdose music was going to be my big finale there, which I've already talked about. So
no. It's still big, man. It's still big. So let me ask you, just in closing, how would people find out more about you and the Consciousness Fund?
So I'm on social. Yeah, I'm on social media, and if you want to find me on X, Twitter, whatever they're calling it these days, then token.Richard is my handle on there. Or if you want to drop us a note via the internet, then it's theconscious.fund, and you can fill in the contact details, and I'll forward the email over to me.
Excellent. Well, I just want to thank you personally for being here. I'm really very, very excited about that. And we look forward to seeing you, hopefully, at the Wonderland conference.
Absolutely. See you in Miami, Keith.
Thank you, Richard, for sharing your valuable insights and expertise with us today. It's been an honor to really learn from you, and we wish you continued success on your mission to advance the field of psychedelic medicine. And to you, our listeners, thank you for tuning in to the Mindfulness Experience Podcast, where we explore the power of mindfulness and the latest trends in conscious living. Remember to subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode.